So you were saying that, blockchain, the specific technology, could be used for replacing Uber, Netflix, and various other things. I didn't really understand that part. How can it replace these platforms?
So it's, that part of that is kind of thinking about where the technology could go in the long term. So it makes sense that you kind of look at it now and be like, wait, really? Like this is supposed to replace that?
Yeah.
But part of what that's about is the notion, which is where a lot of the research and energy and focus and money in the cryptocurrency space is going, which is towards building systems of various kinds. The most common are called smart contracts that would be able to run on top of a blockchain. So all that a cryptocurrency actually is, all that the actual innovation of the technology, which is a big innovation, but all that it actually is something that we could call a distributed, append-only global ledger. So ledger, right? So it's just something that keeps track of things, right? You enter information into the ledger in exactly the way that you would if you were, checking out props in a theater or taking deposits in a bank.
Mm-hmm.
Append only is the especially significant part. It means that nothing can ever be removed and nothing can ever be edited. It can only be added to. Once something is entered into a blockchain, entered into that ledger, the structure of the blockchain is designed to make it so that you can never change it. It's designed to make it so that you can never delete something.
Okay.
So if you think about it from the perspective of like this as a monetary system, right? The goal here would be to make it so that if you receive 10 Bitcoin in your Bitcoin wallet and your entry on the ledger, no one in the future could ever go and reassign those Bitcoins to themselves.
Yeah.
And then global, right? It should be available across the network. It should function not from a centralized place, but be much more widely accessible. And that's also the other aspect, distributed. The ledger is something that the collective who are running the system all maintain together. Everyone in the ideal blockchain system, everyone who's using the system, this doesn't work out in practice, but ideally, everyone who's using the system participates in the maintenance of the ledger. We can all
mining and
okay. Through things like mining and through things like processing transactions. And obviously, again, in practice, this rarely happens, but for a bunch of different reasons that are very kind of technical and boring. But the essence of it is the idea that this is supposed to be a framework where you don't have to trust a third party to maintain the list of who owns what. Instead, the list is maintained by everyone who owns any part of anything. So you can all kind of work together. And that is the essence of what made the blockchain such an interesting development, was that it was the global distributed append-only ledger, but it was also the mechanism for adding things to that ledger and for all of the people who maintained it to agree that those things should be added and that the ledger was correct, which was to say a system for complete strangers to arrive at consensus. And that's a really interesting and strange development, right? Like a way for all of us with our separate computers as strangers who don't know each other, who do not know each other's real world identities, who do not have any kind of like institutional framework for, giving us a stamp of approval. Yes, this is now correct. Could have essentially a consensus protocol that would make it so that we could all agree after a certain amount of work had been done, that the system was correct, the system was accurate, we approved this new entry into the ledger, and all prior entries remain correct and have not been tampered with. Mm-hmm. That's a really weird, novel thing in the world for something like that to exist. And that part of it makes a lot more sense when you think about where the earliest forms of the blockchain came from, which was actually not even from money, but as my colleague Amy Whitaker has worked on, it actually begins with science. Because there's a whole problem in the sciences, which is how do you make sure that when someone makes a big claim and they give you all of the evidence from their laboratory, how do you make sure they haven't cooked the evidence? How do you make sure they haven't faked anything? How do you make sure they didn't, work backwards or lie? So there's this whole tradition of bench lab notebooks, which are paper books, as the name would suggest, that are like numbered and where the pages are all like sewn into the binding in such a way that you can't cut pages out and you can't switch the order of pages. Whatever you write down can be verified as like being in the right order and so on. So you can like, if you're challenged, you can hand over your bench notebooks and people can like go through them and verify that you conducted all these experiments, you found all these results, you know, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. So in the 1970s and 80s, engineers and scientists started to think, what would be the digital equivalent to this? And they actually developed a system, which was the first blockchain, which was designed not necessarily to secure money, but instead to just act as a kind of time-stamping ledger that could say, at such and such a time, all of us agree, all of us distributed strangers on all our different computers around the planet who are part of this network, all of us agree and can verify that this entry was added to the ledger. And that entry might literally be someone saying, like, you know, I like shot an X-ray through this crystal in my lab and I saw the following things. Mm-hmm. And then everyone can now like collectively agree that that is proven irrefutably to have been entered by that person at such and such a time. And we all now can agree on that and can verify that forever. So this is a long way around, but the way that we get to things like Uber and Netflix, they're replacing them, is that now that you imagine a ledger like that, you can imagine that ledger being able to carry some kind of small program that could essentially act as a smart contract. And so if the ledger works as I've described, then you and someone else could enter into a contract together. And that contract would then be like time-stamped on the ledger for everyone to see, verified as like that you know, as confirmed by your private key, as we talked about today, by a cryptographic proof of your identity. You and someone else joined in this agreement together at this time and place with the following, you know, parameters to it. And then it's there, it's verifiable, everyone can kind of confirm for themselves that this is accurate. And so imagine, just to take a toy example, that you could use this to make a bet. You know, you could say like, if by such and such a time, you know, the Golden State Warriors basketball team has successfully like won this by this many points, then I will pay this person the following amount of money. Mm-hmm. And so there you have a bet, it's entered in the ledger, like it's confirmed, you and the other person both know that this is now like publicly time-stamped and entered into. But then, stick with the bet idea, the system itself provides no guarantee that you will pay off on this bet. So instead, you write a basic contract in one or another kind of programming language or script in the blockchain that actually holds some money from you, you know, and we usually think of like cryptocurrency tokens for this, but you really could, like, if there's a way that you could like connect it to, you know, a cash card that just has some money on it, it says, if by such and such a date, the system will automatically Google the scores from last night's basketball game. If the Golden State Warriors get more than this number of points, the system will automatically credit this money to this person I made the bet with. And if they didn't, then they'll credit this money to me or whatever. So you can start to imagine, okay, you've got like a little program that's like a smart contract. So then, and this was the big sort of longer term vision for these kinds of technologies. And then imagine building something more complex that can run with a blockchain system like that as its basis, where instead of needing to have the whole overhead of a company like Uber, you can be a car driver who can actually say, I will set up a kind of contract that every rider can enter into. Imagine this whole process gets very automated and there's a nice interface for it and everything. I can set up a contract such that someone can send me a request to get from one place to another, and I will provide that, and in return, the system will hold some money in escrow, and once they have delivered them to their destination, the system will release the money to me. And this will get kind of much too complicated maybe to talk about here, but if you keep scaling that kind of model up, you can envision systems, people have described them with names like distributed autonomous organizations, where you can imagine someone actually writing a kind of company where if people can prove to the smart contract on the blockchain that they provided such and such a thing at such and such a time, then the system will automatically pay them out from itself. And as people like maintain the blockchain and mine it, it will like generate new tokens of cryptocurrency that it can pay into people, that can circulate and pay and be paid in a way perhaps somewhat like Bitcoin. And you can actually imagine, as bizarre as this might sound, building a kind of company that has no management, no CEO, no board of directors, and no employees, but nonetheless actually structurally provides a service. A company that, in a sense, has nothing but customers and contractors. Whether this would be a good system is like an open debate that we can have, especially in terms of how it might replace a lot of existing companies. If you thought it was hard to convince Uber to provide health benefits or recognize people as employees, imagine doing that with just some like weird blockchain framework. However, if you think about it from the perspective of, let's say, if we wanted to replace Dropbox, this is actually a working example that people are trying to sort of build and scale up into a proper system. Like, I have a bunch of extra space on my iPad. I'm sure you might as well on yours. Lots of us have extra space on our computers. Our computers are online a lot of the time, in some cases all the time. Why can't we say, hey, I volunteer 50 gigabytes of storage, that it will be network accessible sometimes. And I volunteer that in return for something. Why can't I like rent out part of the unused memory space on my iPad? So what if we could actually set up a blockchain-based system with a kind of smart contract structure running on it, in which you could prove to the system, and it would be easy to do, that you were like making some part of your computer memory available to the system. And then the system can allocate that memory to people who want to like store their stuff in the cloud, right? And then, you know, we could get into the technical details about how you might like arrange something so the system knows to like make lots of little duplicate copies of things that people want to store across lots of different machines because they're less reliable than like big formal cloud storage systems. But nonetheless, a situation where then people who want to store their stuff in the cloud, probably paying a lot less than it costs to store it in, you know, a player like Dropbox, can upload things. The system distributes those things into memories that are listed in the blockchain that have some room. And then in return, the people who want to store stuff pay into the system and the system pays you.